Hi, this next piece requires a little bit of a build-up. It's called Rin. It isn't a prompt from a reader. It's technically my idea, but it's actually a prompt from the character themselves. He wanted to have this written. I adore Cara beyond belief. I argue with whatever his name is all the time. Now I mostly don't even call him Thane. Now I call him Senar. This wasn't something that Senar wanted or Thane wanted, but the newly created character of Rin really had hopes and dreams and delusions that he knew were not going to work, and he knew I was not going to let him have. There was a point when my husband was listening to this story where he said, if these guys end up in love with each other, and I said, it's not that kind of story. And it's not that kind of story. It's abuse and it's non-consent. The character of Rin in this case truly wants to transform, but he can't. Not just because I made him that way, because I did, and he would like me to say that I could make him another way, but because of what he did. You can't kidnap, rape, and sexually abuse someone and psychologically torture them and then say, I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Let's start over. He can't, but he really, really wanted to. That's the aspirational part of this character's spirit, is this is more of what he would like to be true. And the plot from this point forward becomes very strange, but he wanted this moment. And he's been kind of arguing with me for about a year about the fact that I should be writing about him and Cara every day. And I can't. I've got other stuff to do. But this one really struck him, really struck me, and he wanted me to write it. I argued with him, but eventually I did because I wasn't getting much sleep otherwise. He feels extraordinarily passionate about Cara, and he really rather desperately wants credit for that passion, even if he knows it isn't love, even if he knows I'm never going to let him get away with it. I built a charismatic, obsessed, delusional bad guy who really wants certain things to be true. And the way the story took off after chapter 14, everything shifts and he has to make the best of extraordinary circumstances. And he does. And it does end up being interesting, but it seriously screwed up his plans of who he wished to appear to be. So part of this is his passion, and part of this is his delusion, but he really does feel this strongly. He would do anything for a time machine to go back, to change who he was, to change what he did. And he can't. So instead of me giving him a time machine, I gave him this chapter. In order to really comprehend a lot of this, or why this chapter is meaningful, the homework is you probably should have listened to all of Kittens and Broken Things and listened to at least Broken Thing up to chapter 12. This is an alternate universe of an alternate universe. It is based on an abusive relationship. Senar in Broken Thing is my idea of a terribly, terribly scary person. But terribly scary people still have inspirations and aspirations and things that are worth their life. And for Rin, she's all of those things. And I can't blame him. Cara is awesome. Rin. He entered her cabin, bearing an evening meal to share, as had become their habit. She was staring at the empty fish tank. She did not look at him, her eyes seeing what had been there and what was not there. It's huge, this fish tank. It can hold so much. I found a few before. This was going to be the best fish tank, the happiest fish. He imagined her naming them and talking to them. He wanted to know their names in the way that he wanted to know everything about her. I don't know what happened to them. I put them there and then I wasn't able to care for them, and I don't know. Did they die? Are they alive somewhere in some other fish tank? Did Garrus? She fell silent and taut with the unexpressed, considering all the empty spaces in her life that had once held the promise of a future. He imagined the possible and probable ends of her thoughts. Had Garrus taken them and was unable to let them go because they reminded him of her? Had he thought of giving them back but could not bear to, because it would mean the end of one of the last connections to her remaining in his life? Were they in a tank somewhere in the Councilor's Citadel Tower office or his apartment? Had they died, and he had been unwilling to replace them with counterfeits, knowing that she would not know their names, and that circumstance for her would be more jarring than an empty tank? For her to know it was an insulting, comforting lie to assure her that nothing had changed in her absence? A desperate lie in Vicarian's case, which he restrained himself from inflicting upon her. He set down the trays of food silently and stepped behind her, gazing at the empty space that held her unkept promises. Lyria, what do you wish? I will bring you new fish, or I will hear you speak of your past fish, or I will break the tank for you. He imagined the most obvious use for the expanse of glass and said, It can be turned to a mirror, so you may gaze at your own grace when in doubt. I'm not so much with the grace. You are mistaken. I need no mirror to see you. Perhaps you do. You're very kind. He could try to be that for her. I am only honest, Lyria. Honest about her grace, at least, as he watched her in the glass. He did not wish to speak of Garrus, did not wish for her to confess her ever-present and obvious love, because she would if she could. She was watching the horizon of her prior life recede. Her nature would not allow her to be less than honest in this situation under most circumstances, but here she wished to protect Garrus and his counselorship, would not be able to confess, must keep her secrets. They had anticipated this, and he had given his Cara mutually crafted permissions and protections, assured her that Rin would not force her to divulge or forsake her relationship to Garrus, that Rin would not need to be told, that the information would not be prone to being overheard by Edie or any other monitoring device. He had spared her guilt, perhaps, but not her ever-present and now free grief as she contemplated emptiness. She had provided to protect Garrus, but not herself. On Beckenstein she had been polished and charming. Here she was those things, but also in turns, permitting Rin to see her express that she was also tentative, manic, and in pain. On Beckenstein he had wished to use her as a pet, and she had known that each weakness would be categorized and exploited. None of his threats to harm Garrus or staff or their families had ever come to pass, as the threats themselves had been beyond effective to control her behavior. He had not, in fact, wished to rape someone before her horrified eyes. He had not wished to be the man who killed staff or their children in her presence. That on its own had been a new experience. She had made him unwilling to be witnessed by her as the self he had known himself to be. She had spared him in that way, and he was in fact grateful that her care and caution resulted in his rules being law. He had been vile and cruel, but ultimately he had not wished to touch another, think of another, had not wished for her to witness him touching another or granting them any importance. She had given in completely, and he had been willing to permit her ownership of the staff to reward her good behavior. They had no longer been his, but hers, like the clothing in her closet, valued only because they were hers. He would have incinerated them as easily as he incinerated her worn clothing, except that she did not wish for it to be so, and he preferred her smiles. He did not rise to the level of caring about them himself, but he did care that she cared, did wish to reward her sacrifices and grace. That intimate crucible had built in heat and pressure, with him unwilling to miss a moment of that experience. Knowing what she had endured, what she was willing to endure, how she felt more deeply about her perceived abandonment of fish than he felt about anything other than her, he was a fascinated supplicant in her presence. His more vicious impulses that had always been provoked by others had never been provoked by her after he had made Cara's full acquaintance. In many ways, she had not allowed it. He had made vile threats knowing she would never allow them to take place. He would release slaves in her name. He would fight reapers for her. He was assured that her best advice would guarantee the best result. For him. Before her presence in his life, he had shed labels of good or bad as applied to him, as he had shed the label of chosen. There had been no one, god or mortal, worthy to judge him other than himself. Her judgment had created the only standard he honored, something she had earned with her intellect combined with her shifting kind and vicious, steel-clad whimsy. She deemed him cheap and vile, and he did not disagree. Yet she had also deemed him an extraordinary man, and he did not disagree. He had been his own judge, and he had known he was vile. He had been at peace with it, was in fact still at peace with it. If the gods did not allow that they loved each other, and did not in fact conspire to ensure that they belonged to each other, he had no use for gods at all. He would recreate his path and his past. He would be responsible for lying about everything about himself other than his passion and need for her. She was his reward for his diligence upon his paths of death and desire. He knew he could never have achieved the intimate crucible of her vulnerable company otherwise. There would have been no way to possess her other than his cheap, vile, and devastatingly effective methods. And he was grateful for them. He had taken her because he had been capable of taking her, and no god had stopped him, nor had she. Perhaps others could have taken her as he had. He doubted any other could have kept her as he had, as he planned to continue to keep her. Whatever reaction took place between them was a value on its own, volatile chemistry that felt like each particle of composition of his body, mind, and soul was touched, entwined, and transformed. Nothing was as important as that reaction, that chemistry, what was possible when she was near him. It was not love, he knew, but it was transcendent and rare, involuntary and addictive. She could not stop it from happening to her any more than he could stop it from happening to him. He reacted to every woman she was, equally incited and excited, whether she granted him her passion, contempt, cold grace, or heated surrender. He stood here with her now, contemplating irrelevant and lost empty space, because he would fill her life. And he had chosen a version of her that was willing, if not eager, to interact with him, because he could not bear the idea of distance from her. He had not become less judgmental, in fact more so in her presence. She exceeded his expectations of grace, and good became again a thing that was relevant to his life. As he watched her exclusively, she excelled, and others fell behind and became unworthy of his notice entirely. He could not label his culling of the criminal community of Beckenstein good, because he had done it to exercise his will to kill and to take. They had all deserved death and to have their possessions taken. He had told her that he did not value the concept of fairness, but that had been a lie he had told, not truly knowing it was a lie at the time. He did, in fact, wish to treat her fairly, if at all possible, ideally. And if that were impossible, he would lavish her with what he knew she valued. A person who did not value fair could not honor a contract, and he had always honored his contracts. Until her. There was some objective truth to fairness that if he had been asked whether or not he wished to murder a 6-year-old Drell child or a 300-year-old Asari slave trader, he knew his choice. Perhaps he did not respond to fair as much as innocence and guilt. He knew himself to be guilty. He knew the Asari slave trader to be guilty, and he did not wish to visit his presence upon the innocent, unless that innocence was named Trelefa. Where he had not told a lie was in the fact that if he were unable to treat her fairly, he would still not hesitate in keeping her. The criminals at Beckenstein had been obvious and bright targets of opportunity, their glaring depravity with attendant weakness drawing him to call down judgment upon them. He had taken her in the same way. She had been an obvious and bright target of opportunity, and he could not label keeping her alive as a good action he had taken. Restoring her to her life here, with him inserted inextricably, was also not a good action, or he had not taken that action because it was good. He had taken that action because these circumstances would give him ample opportunity to place himself in her path, to defy whatever gods guided her, to test his will against hers, to kill reapers, and to take her. Her being alive was objectively and subjectively good, and that was a truth. Good for him, good for the galaxy, good for Vicarian. He did not know if it was good for her. He did know he wished to make it so. Each book, each smile, each fruit plate delivered and enjoyed, each of her sighs and moments of laughter, humor, and passion. Those were good. That was perhaps his only standard of good. She even bore the stamp of innocence, as a person that had seen and experienced great evil, yet was not corrupted by it. She would oppose it, and she would win or die in the attempt. He had stolen her, he had taken her destiny, and he could not return her to herself because he would lose her, and that was bad. Impossible. Even her expressed turmoil now was good. Her moments of pain, of vulnerability, of being alive, and seeing the galaxy as she saw it, seeing fish in empty spaces and wondering about their smaller destinies, and how she had failed to make them the ones she had envisioned. Beholding her was good. She did, in fact, calm and reverse his otherwise constant flow of contempt, creating the chemistry of experience and contemplation that were now his most cherished obsessions. That was, in fact, good. Good for Bekenstein's staff, good for him, good for Vicarian, good for the galaxy at large that might catch his judgment were he not occupied with beholding her. His whole woman knew that as well, that holding his attention gave her the power to stem the destruction he would otherwise sow were it not for her. She had created new and erratic balance in him. He fancied himself as a coin, spinning through light and dark iterations, dazzling and inspired by her, and wishing for her smiles and sighs, where before there had been silence and death. Thin, cold metal, unmoving in the dark, whose only value came from the honed edge. He had even welcomed his own death, but had been too competent at avoiding it. There were colors to the sides of his posited coin, dark and light, but she provided for the flash and spin, the dizzying and joyous, terrifying path he took, the lies and truths intertwined. He could label the sides of himself as much as he wished, but he did not care which side faced her, his dark reveling in satisfaction of schemes, his light reveling in the good of her continued living, even in the fact that her innocence inspired him to preserve and not corrupt. He had harmed her, but not corrupted her. He would continue to harm her in order to maintain the right to spin in her gravity well. Now he would only accept death at her hand, a final volatile choice that would allow him to have experienced all things at her hands, as it should be. Her eyes were racing from the imagined trails of fish to the fading trajectories of her prior life, measuring her own harm, her own inevitability. His whole woman knew she would belong to Rin, and that she was the owner of the dervish he was. Wishing to expose only his light to her would be fanciful and false. If she took a step away from him, he would not allow that. And he knew exactly how useful his dark was in keeping her at his side. He would not hesitate. Right now, he would not force her to contemplate longer on her own, would not coyly force her to chase. She was luffing like a sail in changing wind, facing her past, both knowing her future was inevitable. It would be composed of reapers and Rin, and the less time she spent suffering solitary angst, good or bad or not, the better. He did not wish to see her in prolonged pain. If she was going to be in prolonged pain, it would not be due to her attention on fish or Vicarian. It would be devoted to Sennar, as Sennar was devoted to her. He did not wish to ask her questions whose answers were already known between them. His Cara was wise enough to know that Rin had seen Counselor Vicarian and Lao Shepherd together, and that Rin was no fool. There was no hook there to hang upon. He had made certain of it in all her priming. She would know that Rin would know. She would not need to tell him. Rin was empathetic and kind, understanding, and would never be the man to demand to know her past. He would only be the man to treasure any present or future she was able to provide. His eyes met hers in the glass of the fish tank, and he asked her, "Does your beauty disturb you?" She smiled in answer. "I think I'm ambivalent to my own beauty. I think it's your beauty that disturbs me." He smiled back at her and tilted his head, considering her statement. "My beauty has disturbed many, including me. To be born Drell, to have all eyes turn as I walk by, to know exactly why and how I am prized, has been disturbing. And yet, I find in your case I am grateful to have any allure." "I think it's more about the fact that I'm only standing here because of you." "Then I am grateful for that as well. I am grateful that your beauty, for me, resides in your eyes and your deeds. Can you accept that it could be so? That when I see you in the mirror, that when you see yourself, it is your eyes that hold your charm? Whether they are green or violet does not matter. Can you accept that although you're very pretty, I mean really pretty, I have to admit that when I see you..." "What do you see?" She would never tell him that he glowed. Cara's lack of understanding of her synesthesia and the knowledge that he had successfully changed it had made her unwilling to discuss it. In her opinion, Rin did not need to know of it, and he had complied. There was power in already knowing, and he treasured her reasons for hiding things as much as he treasured her reasons for revealing things. He saw her speed of intellect in her half-drawn breath, taken with the nearly wild, romantic urge to tell him. And then he saw her sliding down the other side of that breath in a new direction. "I've never been rescued before." "I have, Lyria. I know its power. I know your power." "And I see that, too. I can't really describe it, and maybe I have to rely on you to know. I've been armored, I've died, I've been in pain." She would not discuss Mindwar, but she was seeing her parents now, the way her face moved over the subject and beyond. She skirted it, but reached the essence of what she felt. "I was rescued on Mindwar, but I didn't really suffer there. Other people did. But Bekenstein, I have never before been so helpless. My mind taken from me, my will taken from me, my memories, my everything of value taken. And you had every reason to walk in and out of that room and never look back, to do the best a Drell could do to forget. And you didn't." He saw ripples and depths in her eyes, the whisper of his whole woman like bubbles rising up from the ocean floor. "Why did you do what you did?" "I am not a hero, Lyria. I am a man who had nothing to live for until he beheld your eyes. You rescued me, and yet I did not live beyond that point. I did not suffer as I had, but I did not live. I cannot say that I was a good man before I was taken as a slave. I cannot say I was a good man when I was a slave. Being a slave caused pain and rebellion against that pain, yet I still lived in pain even in my rebellion. The pain will always be with me, but I could not bear for that same pain to take you. You had purpose, you had meaning I lacked. If I could restore you to that purpose, perhaps I could be responsible for some of the good you create. A knowing and unbelieving smile graced her lips. So you did it for selfish reasons? As I told you, Lyria, I was and am a broken man. But I could not bear to see your beauty caged and denied. It was worth my life to restore you to your purpose. She held out strands of her hair, contemplating it. Surgical sleight of hand. False beauty. You mistake me and yourself if you believe the beauty I meant had to do with your hair. I'd say the violet ribbons helped, but you also didn't take the opportunity to stare. If that minor ability to be even remotely decent impresses you, I am grateful. She shook her head and dropped her hair, turning to face him, her fingers tracing along his face. You had glass embedded here. Deep. There's no scar. Drell do not form scars as humans do. Where else haven't you formed scars, Rin? Experienced a montage of wounds, lacerations, damage that would form scars in other races throughout his lifetime, called forth by her asking. Technically, I have not formed scars everywhere. There are 2 places where they were given no opportunity. No kidding, really? Is it indelicate to ask where? Don't answer that. I know the answer. Just tell me where. Now I really want to know. He gazed down at her. I truly wish I had not been injured so often on the lips. That would be an excellent answer, but it is not true. A slow smile formed on her adored lips. I think I've exhausted my flirting capacity, and now I'm curious, and I shouldn't be. You need not flirt, Lyria, and you need only ask. In the first instance, beautiful woman, I am at your service, and so inappropriately enamored that I am grateful simply to hear you say you are willing to flirt at all. In the second instance, I had no chance to scar at the back of my right thigh, a vanishingly small patch of irregular skin that I will not point out because I doubt you need that much of a description, and below my left ear. You mean behind your earlobe? I do not have an earlobe. You got me being human, or pointing out a human-sensitive spot the way you pointed out lips. So, we've missed the chance at lip and neck injuries that might be kissed. Though there remain lips and necks still functioning, for which I am grateful. He did not wish to touch her until she asked or allowed him to, an odd magnetic polarity that added to the tension he felt as she looked up at him with her spark of teasing as she danced around unfathomed pain. He resisted the urge to tuck her hair behind her ear as he had done so often, or tip her chin up as his finger wished to. My Lyria, I am gratified by discussions of lips and necks and flirting. Beyond, in fact, and I must say something presumptuous. My feelings for you are not shallow things. My heart has formed scars and may in fact be entirely composed of such, but it is yours if you wish for it to be so. What I must ask is that if you wish to touch me, you understand that gaining your regard is a gift I did not expect, but I welcome. If you feel that your regard would be fleeting, I ask that you pass me by. My heart cannot bear another scar, and one caused by your absence would be one I do not wish to survive. Her brows drew together, and he realized he did not need to tuck her hair or lift her chin. Her hair was fallen back because she was nearly on tiptoes looking up at him as his head bent down, as he stood in a posture of true, not true humility of supplication. So, you'd throw your life away to save mine without asking anything in return. I can't even be a damsel in distress here because you're gonna hog all the distress? She was so beautiful in her teasing warmth, and he nearly fell to her gravity. Only his demand and requirement of fidelity keeping him from her. Again, she created a perfect moment, dark or light, spinning or still. You grant me my worth, Lyria. It will always be so. On the subject of you, yes, I am distressed. Be consoled. You still have all the power inherent to damsel. I should probably disclose here. I was a sex slave and all, in case you haven't heard. I had. I was also his sex slave. And all. And all. Lyria, I will care for your past or not care, as you bid me. I wish to know that you are healed from trauma. I am not. I cannot make it so for you. I cannot make it so for me. But I feel I could be healed through you. I don't know that I'm healed. I don't know if I can. I know I trust you. I know I want you. I know I don't want to go another day without telling you that. I can't seem to thank you enough, or to not want you enough. Then that is good. I need no more thanks, and I am content with you wanting me. Claim me, my Lyria. I can only rise to be yours if you choose that it is so. Please. Blue raced along his nerves, pouring through his skin, sparking on his tongue, and flavoring his words. He leaned down to whisper to her with the only light he could produce, the light that belonged to her, needing to make it belong to them. Tell me. His lips were close enough to the skin of her throat for arcing blue to warm her, along with his breath, her throat bared and bent, her outrush of breath making a sound from her. He knew so well. It was her blend of surrender and encompassing, his shepherd, his Drell, his Cara, his Lyria. All things in her unspoken voice that he heard because he knew her, knew his lips, could caress her skin and she would not stop him, that she would sway and fall. He almost allowed it for her to pass without a choice, without her words making it so, but he needed her words. There was no venom on her skin, only his voice, the warmth of his lips, his biotics, all they had done together to reach this moment. His whole woman knowing somewhere that he had abandoned all his lives, all his names, for her, and only for her. That his life and death belonged to her. That Rin was what he wished for her, what he wished for them, if not for himself. To be permitted to live, to be rescued, to struggle and to serve rightness. To be the chosen of the only goddess he found worthy of worship. Rin, please. Power and helplessness blended in her voice, as though her hand spanned his throat and waist, as his had spanned hers so many times. Suspense and certainty. You must ask, Lyria. You must tell me that I belong to you. You belong to yourself. Her words were weak shadows of truth, what she might want, but what would never be real. He would not allow those words to be real. You are wrong, beautiful woman. You may not wish for it to be so. You may wish for me to be free to choose, but I am only free to know that you choose. Before I touch you, Lyria, you must know that practiced pleasure was taught to and taken from me as a slave. I have not touched another since I saw you first. I have not, will not, touch another woman, for she would not bear the echo of green eyes filled with hope and pain. I abandoned all taken and trained pleasures, but I want them all now. To make them mine, make them yours, make them ours. I do not wish to allow my skin to touch yours, without you knowing that each thought, each touch, each moment of pain endured to learn how to serve. They now have meaning and worth if it means that when I saw you, I knew my life, my purpose, my service belonged to you. You challenged me to no longer hide in the dark, to be free to stay. You ordered me to stay. I will obey. Say it, Lyria. Give me the right to your bed, to your body, to serve you, protect you, and learn new prayers and affirmations, words and actions of meaning because we say them and do them together. What do you want me to say? Her hands were gripped into tight fists. He feared her nails would dig into her palms, and he did not wish to allow harm to come to her from what twined in the dark. That thought blended with the inrush of desire and jealousy, of wanting her nails to only mark his skin, for them both to be released from what truths he was telling that would twist and mock if he allowed her thoughts to bend that way. His light and truth would turn her swirling gravity in the dark into his aurora. He should not draw her attention to certain words, certain phrases, certain names, but at the moment he did not care if it tore the veil from her entirely, for her to feel and for him to see widening violet revelation in her full horror and his utter lack of practicality. For the chance that she would choose him as he chose her. for her to love him whole, for fate and the gods to grant him true peace and passion shared as they waged war with all else. He could learn to love her if granted her example and grace. With those fervent wishes, he whispered, "It is the will of the sand, my Lyria. Tell me these words. Say them with truth, with what you know, and never take them from me. Tell me, he is mine. And then I will show you how true those words are, and always will be." Her body straightened and her arms tensed, ready to close around her, for his fingers to slip into her mouth, for venom to take hold as he whispered to her, her storm caged and fed by blue crackling will. He hung suspended as she squared her small shoulders, drew in the breath of potential ruin and promise. As she said with what he knew was blurred memory, Drell devotion, Cara's giving, shepherd's command, and his Lyria's wish to grant him grace and place for rescuing her. He is mine. With those words, the pull to her was polarized as his hands moved down her forearms, caressing her skin as he opened her clenching fists to twine his fingers with hers. His breath was short in the presence of covenant and care as he drew her against his body. The storm of blue and will, veiled and bared truths crackled in the air. He pressed a reverent kiss to the skin of her throat and told her in prayer and promise, "Car Ivelas, Lyria, may you speak the words of truth, woman who is above and beyond me." The moment was rich with her scent, the feel of her layered and dovetailing destiny, the fire on his skin, and the fact that she was not blushing but standing straight and strong as he trembled and felt each thread of destiny pull and knot. Each path crossed in this moment with him humbled and exalted and wishing nothing but to envelop her, treasure her, and honor that her will brought them here. And she was where she belonged. And now he was where he belonged. He alternately faded and flared, proud and humbled, relishing the irony of circumstance and truth and need. He had been told as a child that he was destined and chosen, and now he felt how weak that hold had been on him, compared to what it meant to behold and be held in her twin sons. She was his path, and regardless of what she had once wanted, now she would want him. Now they would take each step together, her destiny irrevocably twined with his. Theirs. His feet would remain in shifting sand, his eyes would be drawn irresistibly to the sky, where her otherwise unseen dark twists were illuminated by the flare of his biotics. His aurora was his fate and path, his only signpost and shores. His rightness. He no longer cared about his names or her names, needed no voice, as she leaned into his embrace. He could feel the tension of her. All their work, all his work that led to this moment, were her previous lives, her previous selves, his previous lives and his previous selves had been mutually abandoned to create what was the blending, if not sharing, of their wills. She whispered with all the conviction she was capable of generating. She is yours.
His Lyria would never take without giving, even if he demanded that it be so. His gentleness and care for his Drell were rooted in the moments that had begun with empowered taunting, and then turned to trying to ease the sting and cost, to comfort his willful and terrified shepherd-turned-Cara. He had been fascinated as the sensations of absolute power over her and wanting to serve her twined into something irreplaceable. A feeling he reached for and grasped over and over in the measured minutes his venom allowed her to experience her whole conflict. Whatever his Drell gave him was weighted against those minutes, as her will was taken and her terror faded through his kisses and whispers. Some of the things he had said to her as he had drawn her whole into his arms had borne his deeper truths, as he watched her helpless descent and ascent as venom took hold. He had told her so, knowing she would forget, but he would not. Cara, I will watch over you. Whatever my venom takes from you, I will bear as burden of truth. You are adored, you are wanted, you are needed. I cannot make who I am different, but I can make a difference. Reapers will fall, and you will be adored. So often her tension and tears had melted to her unguarded and abandoned moans, as he carried forward what he knew he had taken from her, given as much back as was possible of his body and his heart and his mind. He knew he was unworthy of her offerings to him, but he needed them. He wished to honor her as she sacrificed herself willingly at his demanded altar. Cara, if I had a wish, it would be to be worthy of you. Know this to be a truth. I was not, and I am not, a man who invests in wishes. But before you, I did not have them at all. You told me not to grow a conscience, that I would choke, and I know you are right. I know you are right, Cara. But if I were a man of right, I still would not have you. I will do all I can do to serve, if not love, then to serve your happiness, with what we will cause to be. Now she did not remember those moments, but she did feel and fear them in their dark and bright echoes. He knew it, as the urge to surrender all she had and take all he had to give called them forth. He would not stop. He would never stop. He would never give her up. She knew in her blue-infused bones that he would take all she had to give and give all he had back. His mind and heart might be flawed, but his body would serve her as he knew he could, that forged strength and will at her call. He had begun their time together, reveling in what he had taken from her, moved to reveling in what he could give her. And now he fervently wished to see what they could create together, with her will free to pursue her destiny. He said to her now, Lyria, I thank you for your gift, for all your gifts. As you have said, and as I feel, I cannot seem to thank you enough. The words, I cannot seem to thank you enough, spun in light and dark, mocking and true meaning and gravity, with him marveling at how exquisitely words were shaped in her presence. She had told him she would content herself with digging herself out, and he would content himself with digging himself deeper, and in this moment he felt only that digging in any direction had ceased as they met each other, where up became down and down became up. She must know some satisfaction of her plan unfolding somewhere inside her, and he honored and owned that woman, as well as all his other women that she embodied. He had the given rights to her body, but for the moment all he desired was their hands entwined as they were, her weight trusting to him to keep her upright. He'd had his moments of searing clarity, of death, of desire, of freedom. And as she loosened her hands in his and wrapped her arms tightly around him, as his arms enfolded her, he wished for only the searing clarity, not of death, or desire, or freedom, but of Rin's ambitions made whole. To stand for her, stand by her, stand with her, and serve. He was sanctified by her touch. He hoped for that to be the will of the sand, to transform, to be given the chance to be her Rin, promising himself that he would never wake her, would never tell her, would never allow her to suffer for his choices, that his whole woman would rest, knowing she was adored, and that his promises that might have once been empowered mockery were in fact sacred to him, that he worshipped her, and his devotion was all he had to give, that goddesses cannot always choose the worshippers that were drawn to their light, but none would need her light and gravity more than he did, and would. The petty allure of his overt power over her faded and dimmed. All the urges to press her to her knees before a crowd were cut from him in a bloodless, numbed slice, and fell away, to disintegrate, to smoke, sacrificed to their future together. He did know his aurora in the storm. Promises of skin and sex faded before the urge to comfort his whole woman, apologize for what he had done, to be forgiven and redeemed, to not mock her, that if she remembered she would know there had been no twisted words, for him to strive to make the illusion so powerful and devoted that she would never see through it, would never need to see through it, would never want to see through it, to create sacred space for her. Perhaps for them, weakness or strength gripped him, and he felt he should leave the ship, release her, turn and walk away wordless, do no more harm, perhaps end his own life after contacting her and setting her free. He imagined that path and yearned to be the man that could, or would, do that for her in a leaping, aspirational moment, but the answering and overwhelming dark surge of no, in response to even the thought, much less a taken step toward that potential path, leaked through his biotics and caused a surging flow into her skin, to her bones from his. His arms tightened around her. He still and always would bear the uncontrollable urge to possess her. At that surge of affirmation, his Lyria held him tighter to her. His balance was reaffirmed and fated. Never, Drell, I will never let you go. Forgive me or do not forgive me, but I will never let you go. Tain Krios fell away. The ephemeral and illusory potential path of Sinar to Elan without sin fell away, and he was Rin, flashing with the spin and turns of gravity, crackling with will, bound and committed to serving his Lyria while serving himself. Rightness had no power on the path they walked together if it led her away from him. He would dig deeper if he must. He knew her could ask anything of her and receive it, could press venom to her skin and her mouth, and draw moans from her as he created her desires and then fulfilled them. But whoever he was that knew her, Rin must be a different man for her. His desires and digging would remain nameless, and he would not touch her with them. He sought peace for her. She was trembling, and he imagined she was watching all the solid things that had once ruled her life. Her parents, her love for Vicarian, even her command, shimmer like the faded mirages they were and collapse. The sight of them was blocked by whoever he was. He demanded that if she walked, she walk with him and no other, or her path would end, and he would deny her a chance at her destiny, retreat to the proposed cave with coveralls and canned food if he must, and they would play out his demanded destiny because he could do nothing else. He tried to think of what to do for her, but his body answered with what he wished to do in this moment. He lifted her into his arms, her head cradled against his shoulder, his hand sliding through the strands of her hair, his rightful place. Not the bed. He did not wish to force her to sex and frenzy. He wished to grant her peace. Even if cheap and vile, illusory peace was all he had to offer her in the end, along with the denial of all her desired past, future, and freedom. He carried her to the couch, allowing the illusory peace of his choice to invest his voice. Sleep, Lyria. I promise you I will be here when you wake. All the words that crowd your mind can be spoken later, and I will listen with hungry ears then. Neither your burdened silences nor your words will ever be forgotten. Unlike all my words, which I forced you to forget, my Drell. I remember. His brows drew together, his eyes tight and burning, lips quivering as he kissed the hair he had forced to midnight, as he held the woman he had exalted to her degradation. He could never lift her higher than she could ascend on her own. But she would never be on her own, so he must lift her. She cried until choking sobs tore at them, with her falling to sleep in his arms, as he whispered fervent prayers she could not hear to the sands and the surging dark. Take me as you have taken me, but spare her knowing. Grant her joy. Let me carry our burdens, and let her illusion of love and freedom be greater things than the reality of those who know love and freedom. Please, make it so.